Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Golden Axe 2 for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. This is a side-scrolling arcade-style hack-and-slash game by Sega that was released in December of 1991. And it's kind of weird what happened with this particular game. I reviewed the original Golden Axe quite a long time ago, and I really did enjoy that game quite a lot back in the day. And even today, it's still a pretty good side-scrolling arcade-style beat-em-up or hack-and-slash game, whichever you'd prefer to call it. It certainly has issues, but it's still pretty fun to play. It had a catchy soundtrack, all sorts of things like that. So the sequel happened, and it had a bit of a mixed reception. On the one hand, some people really liked the changes that it made to the original game, and other people felt like it just didn't go far enough with that. So, I guess the question here is, how does this stack up to the original Golden Axe, and is it a solid beat-em-up arcade-style hack-and-slash game in and of itself? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it's a bit of a mixed bag, especially when you compare it to the original game, because not much changed between them. In terms of visual quality, this one is slightly better than the original. It has some more detail and things, but that's kinda it. By and large, they look pretty much the same in terms of quality. The difference being that the designs in this game are more simple than the original game's designs. And so you have certain things that have less detail, certain things that have more detail, and they decided to go more with a lot of those color palette swap enemies than they did in the original game. And that gets kind of annoying, because you have a fairly short game here. It's only about 7 levels long, and the enemy variety is fairly limited throughout the entire game. And even the original didn't quite feel so stale so quickly, in terms of its visuals anyway. That's not to say they're bad, they certainly look fine, it's just that they could have done so much more with it, and that's kind of disappointing. And then you have the sound design, which is where things really did tank for this game in terms of especially sound effects, which are just so much worse than the original game. The effects just sound like they came out of a game several years older than this actually is. And in fact, the original game's sound effects are a bit more detailed and have just more oomph to them. For example, when you're swinging your sword or axe around, it sounds more like a bit of static noise than an actual sound effect, and things like that just really drive the sound design down. The music's alright, it's not quite as catchy as the original games, but it's pretty solid stuff, and it certainly has that very nice adventurous feel to it, and it does have some memorable tracks here and there. It's just that it's not quite as iconic as the original game's stuff was. So the presentation overall is somewhat of a mixed bag, and in a lot of ways is much weaker than the original games. But the real question here is, how do the story and gameplay hold up? Because they're what really count here, especially the gameplay, because this is a side-scrolling hack-and-slash beat-em-up kind of deal. So you don't really expect much in the way of storyline. And the story in this is incredibly simple. It's summed up in a simple 25-second cutscene. And that's pretty much what you're seeing right now. The entire plot is that this evil guy named Dark Gould is basically trying to do evil things, and so you must defeat him. And that's kinda it, really. You're playing as the same characters that you had in the original game. You have the Amazon Tyrus Flare, the Barbarian Axe Battler, and the Dwarf Julius Thunderhead. And they play almost exactly the same as they did in the original game. Difference is that they changed up some of the animations. It seems to me like some of the hitboxes are a bit off on those animations too, but I'm not entirely sure on that. It's just hard to tell sometimes, because the original game had this issue too sometimes, where enemies would be able to hit you when you couldn't hit them, even though your animations are clearly going into a position where you would be hitting them, and things like that. It didn't happen quite as much in the original game to a detrimental degree, though. And in this case, it happens quite a lot and gets very annoying, particularly when you're playing on any difficulty higher than easy. Now, it's worth noting that even on the easy difficulty, this game's pretty damn hard. a lot of people actually said that it was easier than the original game, and it felt too easy. I don't know where they're getting that from, but the original game was much less BS-y difficult than this is. And it could just be the version of the game I'm playing. I'm playing it on the Sega Genesis Classics collection here, but it just seems like the game has more BS difficulty in it, where enemies can hit you and you can't hit them, and things like that. Now, it's worth noting that in terms of gameplay, it is improved over the original game to some degree. For example, the back attack that you had by pressing the jump and attack buttons at the same time, where, for example, with Axe Battler in the original game, he would just twirl his sword around and strike, and it would be a more powerful strike than normal. Well, they replaced that with an attack that attacks both front and back for all of the characters, so it's just a much more useful attack in general. They also changed up the system for throwing enemies, where you can actually now, right before you throw an enemy, press a direction and you'll throw them in that direction. And the biggest change was to the magic system. For one, they changed up what the people actually use. For example, Julius no longer uses lightning attacks, he now uses rock attacks. And Axe Battler no longer has those weird explosion-based magics, and now has wind-based magic. Tyrus's magic is pretty much exactly the same as it was in the original game, but they changed up all the animations for it. It's still fire-based magic. But now, instead of just having to collect the magic, in this case it's books, in the original game it was potions, but instead of just having to collect all the magic points that you need to be able to use the appropriate level of magic, now you can actually either tap it for a quick, weak magic blast, or you can hold down the button to charge up your magic. So you don't have to use all of it at once this time around. And that's certainly nice. You can conserve magic for when you really need it, but at the same time, it seems like they made magic weaker. Because I was dealing with enemies even on just the second level, where even a fully powered blast of, say, Julius's magic wasn't able to take him down. And so what you find here is that while the magic is more versatile, it's not quite as powerful feeling as the original game. And that's something that's worth noting. Compared to the original game, there were ups and downs here. It still has the pretty straightforward beat-em-up style gameplay where you just walk up to enemies, you can smack them upside the head a few times with your sword or your axe. You can enter a certain amount of combos depending on your spacing to that character and such like that. You can still do the dash attack where you double tap a direction and you'll start running, and then you can tap the attack button and you'll do a running attack that knocks them off their feet. You can still do jump attacks, you still have that back attack, but again, it was improved. But by and large, this wasn't a substantial improvement over the original game. Certainly not enough for me to really justify recommending this anyway. If you're a pretty diehard fan of Golden Axe, or just even a normal fan in general, you might be able to get something out of it. And to some degree it can be fun, but more often than not I found myself frustrated by it. And that's kind of weird because I really do enjoy the original game quite a lot. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's kind of hard to recommend, but all in all, I still can say it's not a bad game. It's just disappointing compared to the original game. We pretty much had high hopes after the original game was as good as it was, and it was a very, very solid beat-em-up game. And there was plenty of room for improvement, but they didn't really capitalize on it here. And so, again, that makes it kind of hard to recommend as a result. It feels like a weird transition piece that only really big fans of the series are going to get much out of. That said, if you are interested in picking up a copy of this game, I do have a link in the video description box to where you can do so. Thanks for watching.